Here we go. So my name is Kanika Selvan. I'm from Manchester. Ooh. Hey. Not many of us here. Yeah, I've got a little word. Thank you, I appreciate that. I manage a small change consultancy called Beetroot. We work mostly with social enterprises, with third sector organisations, and then with public sector organisations. And beyond that, I'm also a black woman. I'm also neurodivergent. I have spent a long time working in very large tech spaces, mostly within IT teams. And most often I am in a space where it's either kind of change management or program management or project management. And actually, I've spent a lot of time working in organisations where I suppose I'd say that I've been in spaces where I've been navigating kind of workplace dynamics that just never made a huge amount of sense to me, if I'm honest. And I end up in conversations where I definitely would say that at my age, not very old, but at my age, I feel like I've gotten quite good at kind of navigating through masking and kind of shaping, what needs to be said in different rooms. And I suppose, if I'm honest, in some ways, my experience and my journey through IT, particularly, means that actually I'm a bit of a, and people find this a bit harsh, I'm a bit of a statistic, in the sense of, I'll explain, for most of us who work within that kind of social justice space, I think that if we really think about it, I suppose I've been brought up in a family without a huge amount of money, where I was brought up thinking that actually money in many ways brought security and opportunities and peace. And I think for me, actually, I've been hit on by men in rooms where, they've kind of, I've been in some of those spaces where some of that's been really challenging. I've gained jobs, I'd say, the other side of that, through kind of amazing female networks who've gone, you're really incredible and you could really do that. I think that I've, in many spaces, worked the evening, worked really long hours because that's what felt like what needed to be done. I've definitely sacrificed my own well-being to travel to be where I needed to be and benefited in a work capacity from doing that. But as well as that, I've been quietly pushed into positions and roles where actually I've been kind of schooled on what would be acceptable behaviour. I've also been disruptive in environments where actually it hasn't been welcome, and I've been disruptive in environments where it's been really welcome. I've definitely been, so you're getting all of it, I've definitely been in spaces where I've been disliked, often by women, which is an interesting one, and I've definitely been in spaces where actually the environment has felt like it's really welcomed everything that I am and where it hasn't welcomed everything I am. And ultimately, I suppose it's worth you knowing, I'm a person where I feel like I've experienced, a variety of different environments, and actually in many ways I think that I've had such privileges in being able to work in tech and in change. I've been able to build amazing team cultures, I've been able to dismantle teams that have been amazing, and actually in many ways actually the freedom of that and actually all of that's brought has been kind of a double-edged sword. Now I run Beetroot, and actually, we're doing well, and actually we are a consultancy that's able to do stuff that is a bit different because actually we're quite small. But as well as that, I recognise that we very much compete with consultancies that have sharp suits and, went to Oxbridge and say it nicely, and I think that's the same slide deck, and that's the reality of it. I know that I've definitely been in spaces where I've made mistakes and I've thought, let me just do that whole thing differently. I know that I've been in leadership positions where people have come to me and said, we think that you will understand this, Kanika, so let me tell you about this really harrowing racist thing that has happened and I need you to go and deal with it even though it's not in my line. As well as that, I live in Moss Side. Someone's coming in. I live in Moss Side in Manchester. I grew up in that area in South Manchester, and I have one coffee a day because I'm only allowed one. And my favourite my favourite animal is my dog Macduff. and I love tech. I love tech change. I think that tech will revolutionise the world. I think that revolution will be televised. I also think that I love tech and I love why Beetroot exists, but I don't like leaving my house too much, which is why I was like slightly dragged into today. I was like, I'm going to do the full day, and I was like, I'm just going to turn up one. I also think that I don't like wet food and dry food on a plate. I think that I don't really understand people who aren't just feminists. I think that anyone who doesn't like Beyonce,
amen.
Yeah.
it's misogynoir, right? I'm like, you might not like the music, but you don't like Beyonce. I was like, dig deeper. I don't like small talk at conferences. I've started putting this into talks. I don't like small talk. I like big talk. I like to talk about social justice and politics and power. And if you want to speak to me after this, I'll probably be outside vaping, which is, I know, a bit of a contrast to the social justice thing I just talked about. So yeah, I just thought I'd give you all of that information, and then I would ask you this, right? Does anyone think I overshared? No, not at all. No,
Undershared.
Undershared? Could you have had more?
Yeah.
A little bit more? Well, I mean, I asked the question, right, because I was thinking, right, as I was writing this, and obviously you've got like a list of everything that's in my life, in my head, and my trauma. And actually I was thinking, that kind of, don't say all that in public, you know, that kind of tension that we hold, you know, it's really interesting because it's a really good reflection of that moment where you go, why am I nervous to say all of those things that feel quite vulnerable? You know, I come from a poor community, I don't have a huge amount of money when I was growing up. Actually, I think I bought into the whole I'll make money and then I'll be okay. And, you know, all of that kind of narrative around having your opinion and turning it up fully and knowing that actually there'll be a couple of you who thought, do you know what I mean? Not quite sure. And I think actually it's because I think it's probably a really good example of one of those workplace rules about how much kind of vulnerability we show, how much we turn up as a full person. And ultimately, I think that it's a really good example of probably like 98% of the thinking that happens in your head when you decide to do an activity like this, right? So when you decide, I'm going to go and do a kind of matriarchal model design, you're going to, it wasn't about telling everyone about it, it was definitely that kind of challenge of recognizing that you'd put yourself into a position where you'd made a commitment to do something, and essentially then realizing that a huge amount of that was about your internal thinking. I'm going to move on to the next slide. I'm absolutely not nailing it with this remarkable, and then the other bit. Let me stand here. Move this out of the way.
Can I help you slide?
Oh, fabulous, yeah. Do you want to come in? Oh, you could just take it. I'll just we'll not all think back to when people used to say next slide all the time. not a fun memory. So,
next slide.
Next slide. Have a remarkable error, everybody. Oh. It's just getting good. Okay, so I thought we'd start with an individual reflection. And I think I just wanted you to take a moment to think about a moment when you felt really safe, really seen, really cared for in community, simply because you mattered. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds and I'm going to give you some time to just really think about it. So. Have you got it? Yeah. So keep hold of that memory and that feeling. And I think for me, I wanted you to go and find that, because for me it's like that feeling of kind of coming home from holiday and getting into your own house, right? And you know that your bed sheets are your own and the pillows are your own. It's that feeling when you know that you've been at work and everything's been in chaos actually someone messages you and goes, do you want me to help you with that thing that's a bit hard? And it's definitely that thing that is about finding a space within you where you really recognise what it feels like to kind of belong and to exist in a space where actually you can be kind of held and cared for. And you don't need to earn it, right? That's the thing about simply because you mattered, you know, that feeling that you have. And I suppose I asked you to find the memory because actually from patriarchy to matriarchy and this design piece of work, the truth of what it really is, you know, underneath the kind of slogans is actually, it's about that feeling you just had and about this idea that we talk about feminism and we talk about matriarchal care and we talk about structure and we talk about a whole load of theory. But actually for me, when we delved into the research, this kind of care economy and all the books, and we started looking into, you know, particularly with Clara, you know, various kind of German, French speaking circuit speakers who tell us all about all of these different things, which is really fascinating. You know, and actually as part of that, when we're thinking about what does this really mean and what does the design really need to look like, a lot of that was about exploring inclusivity in a way that's actually really pragmatic and really workable and really engages with then the culture and design of the organisation. And I think the idea of searching for that feeling, the feeling that I hope that most of you are able to find, you know, is about asking ourselves whether we could actually build that into a workplace. And I think that actually, as a person who works as a change professional, it's probably one of the hardest, probably challenges that I've ever had, which is that, you know, for me, everything is about how can we make it really actionable and how can we really embed it. You know, I'm obsessed with it. I'm not a design person. I'm like, does it exist? Can you feel it? Can you measure it? That's where I exist. And actually a lot of this is about, you know, telling you a story of, you know, something that I feel like we talk about a lot, you know, inclusion and, you know, feminism, but actually it always felt way too kind of theoretical for me. And actually within that, actually I felt like we needed to have a conversation, I suppose, within my organisation about what that really looked like pragmatically on the ground. Look, it's cool now, isn't it? So before we kind of get into this, I wanted to kind of, before we dive into kind of matriarchy, I wanted to kind of just go, let's just do some definition, just so you know what I'm talking about, because you might be a bit like, I don't know what she means, and it's always good to kind of go definitions first. And I suppose patriarchy, and this is based on the slide, and I'm crediting below, you know, the definition I'm using here is this idea that actually, you know, acknowledging that there are kind of hierarchical systems where domination and control are normalised. The idea that the kind of higher up you are, the more power you have over others. And the idea that actually in systems that actually, you know, have that sit around these, you know, we have things like, you know, racism and capitalism, and that those are all possible in part because actually we have some of these existences and existing systems of domination that exist within society. And I think that we've been taught in many ways, I said I wasn't going to debate feminism, we've been taught in many ways that actually feminism is very much about kind of women getting more rights or getting to the top. And I think this was definitely something that kind of sat with me within this exploration, which was this idea of, you know, if I make more money, if I'm more successful, I'll be okay. And there's definitely something about that kind of narrative of kind of girl bossing and leaning in and all of that kind of stuff, which I think, you know, for a while for me hasn't felt very relevant. But I didn't know what the alternative was, and I was confused about that. And actually, in part, a lot of this idea of, you know, dismantling some of these things didn't feel like I could pragmatically understand how to apply it. And actually, the values work and the kind of values on people's websites, I just felt like I constantly rejected. You know, we are about this, and I was like, yeah, but what is it though? You know, I don't understand what it is. And I suppose that to me, actually, a lot of this is about feeling like there was something that just wasn't right, and I was done with it. You know, I was frustrated by it, and I wanted to see how we could find a way of thinking about taking that frustration and changing the way that we think about time, money, energy, work, and how everyone gets a piece. So I thought I would ask you the second question, which is not on the slide deck, don't click, which is about, could you confidently give me a definition of what matriarchy is? This is a test. Well, you can shout it out if you want.
No, probably not.
No? Thanks for being honest. We like that too. Anyone?
I have a start, but I wouldn't be confident.
Do it imperfectly. I
matriarchy would be a female-led society.
Cool. Anyone else? Anyone to build on it?
Well, going from the structure of patriarchy, it would mean domination by the mothers.
Do you want to expand on that?
Well, that the mothers, the women of the clan, they set the rules, they observe and control is not the right word, but manage behavior of everyone. It doesn't say anything about the purpose. So domination by the fathers, that could be a good purpose as well. Domination by the mothers could be a good purpose. So it's just a matter of who's doing the domination. Archy doesn't change.
Interesting. So the if we flick over onto the next slide, so you go there. Now I'm cueing you to flick thing. Actually, when we're going into some of this, and it's interesting because I defaulted to with this thinking around going, what is the opposite of here? And I think in many ways, and we have debated the mother, the father internally for a while. Very similarly, I think this idea is that a lot of people think matriarchy is about the idea of women being in charge. You know, that it's kind of strangely kind of gendered in that way. But actually, I think it's fundamentally about kind of flipping the script, you know, in an almost kind of radical way, and removing the idea that actually domination is the key principle, but actually about the idea of designing kind of systems in a way that means that you get kind of community and care and reciprocity and love, as well as that, you see that on there, you know, within a space, within the systems, within the power systems, and within organisations. And I think that this is very much about how we organise ourselves, how we exist as individuals, how organisations and cultures exist and practice, and how things actually exist within kind of the ecosystem of the world as well. And I suppose actually, you know, for us to be able to explore this and to really think about how we kind of think about sharing power and decision making and workplaces and things like that, I suppose what I would love for you all to think about this is as a kind of you know, a conversation about actually how we kind of boldly decided we wanted to redesign things in a way that actually was about recognising that we wanted our organisations to be different to the way that the rest of the world was, which I think was actually one of the kind of really key things that became something we were kind of cognizant of, but definitely didn't have a really good understanding of what that actually meant in practice. And I think that the biggest thing about all of this is actually that when we talk about kind of matriarchy, that kind of what are we talking about in the sense of definition, one of the biggest challenges when talking about this is nobody has any idea what we're talking about. Like the matriarchy, and they're like, yeah, women in charge. And I'm like, no, that's not what we meant. You know, and being that it means this, actually, and how we kind of each conceptualize this differently, one of the biggest things is about how do we make it so that actually this is something that isn't about just the kind of statement in and of itself. How do we make it something that organisations can really be in a way that means that actually it's accessible for people to understand what we mean? And I suppose a lot of that is like when we're having this conversation today, which is very much about can we make it so that when we go matriarchy, people don't think we're speaking French in an English-speaking room? Can we make it not a utopian dream and actually something that feels really kind of practical? So in a sense of what was the 6 months then, with those definitions in mind, I wanted to ask you a question, which was, what do you think happens to businesses that reduce the power imbalances and increase shared decision making? Have you read the slide deck though?
No.
She's read the slide deck.
I haven't.
Be honest.
I haven't. I'm just feeling inspired.
Okay.
I would say everyone starts to feel more empowered to share their ideas, lead maybe, take charge. It just sounds like it leads to empowerment when everybody understands like we're all human. Essentially the titles that we give ourselves mean something that actually they don't because they don't. So everyone starts to feel empowered no matter what level or what title they are. Everything is kind of like welcomed to share and build.
Fabulous.
Maybe something about listening, that there might be a space in which people get listened to before making decisions.
Absolutely.
I was just thinking about the definition when you were saying about matriarchy before. The first thing that came into my head
not correctly, was girl power, because that's how we've been systematised, Spice Girls, all that kind of carry on. So I would say the opposite of these. People will leave. People will say, what's that? She's just got promoted because of them, too soft. What the effing? We're not bringing money in. That's the way the power is. What's going to do to our share price?
You've just got like 5 slides out.
Yeah.
No, I love it.
It's about that. People talk about it in an ideal world, yes. But when you're having, I'm just thinking of conversations I might even have with male friends.
Yeah.
You woke.
Yeah.
Laughing, it's a joke, but it's not really a joke.
Yeah.
Oh, Paula, again, you're talking again, aren't you? No, you think because you're working in public sector, it's not in real world.
Yeah, you've got the opportunity because it's in that space. Yeah, yeah.
I want to question, stroke, challenge mother-centered. For those of us who have chosen not to have children, that feels exclusive.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because the big debate that we had internally, I mean, this is a standard slide, so this isn't a slide I've created, it's one we're sharing just as a definition. We had a big conversation about mother-centred because, to share openly, I also felt the same. I also probably still do, if I'm honest. But I think it's interesting because actually it was the idea of going, is there a definition of mother that means something different to what we're describing it to be?
It's female-centred, even, I think.
I think that the definition of mother becomes entirely different in the sense of, what is mothering? I think it's more around what is care, I suppose, in this scenario. Let's move us on. I've had my 10-minute call. But I think that what I wanted to give you was just some of the facts around, I suppose, this piece around what would we get if we had an organisation that did things differently. And these may be kind of very, very kind of familiar in the sense of, what is exactly is the kind of stats around this. And it feels a bit like, when you do a kind of EDI business case. And actually, you end up with a similar thing, which goes, if you get more empowered people, if you get flatter organisations, you get more innovation, you get less challenges, less poor behaviour. And actually the idea of it is actually a lot of the stats say that actually you get better problem solving. And actually you get an organisation where people feel a bit like they're coming home after a long trip. It's that feeling of care. And I think the key bit about that is that when I thought about how I had worked and I told you a bit about my story, a lot of that kind of ambition to do something different was because actually I felt a bit like I'd been in a number of different organisations where I wasn't gifted that. And I didn't want to create an organisation that then really kind of replicated the various different episodes of ADHD burnout that I'd had, the various different environments that I'd been in when I'd been in leadership positions and had to kind of manage around systems that didn't feel like they helped me to help create care in the organisation. I think that actually it even lived within kind of contracts that we created, engagements we had with the other organisations. And really, this is probably in many ways was the kind of why for us. So that kind of driver for doing something different was about going, we think that the stats tell us we could do something different. We think there's this idea of kind of matriarchy. We think we don't really like the patriarchy stuff. So why don't we try and do something different within our organisations? And I think that the bit around kind of what then came next is about me telling you that actually this isn't a we've arrived talk, this is kind of what we've explored in the first 6 months. But actually I think that it's definitely been work that's been messy, that's been hard, and that a lot of people definitely have conceptualised to be a little bit soft in its ambition, and about work that's about care. So we click to the next slide. So don't groan when I give you this slide, because I know that it looks like a value slide within a website of an organisation. Like, I get it, right? But it's really hard to do less words, okay? So just forgive me. And I suppose I just wanted to say to you all, in giving you this slide, it's to say, when we thought about what do we want to explore when we were doing the matriarchy stuff, what we actually decided was actually that there was no off-the-shelf manual nor framework. And we Googled it a lot, right? We were like, where's the framework for matriarchal organisations? Surely one exists. We'll just copy-paste it, it'll be fine. And sadly, actually, what we found out was that there was a huge amount of research that's kind of historical, which I think that we've already heard kind of reference, kind of indigenous societies. There's some interesting stuff within kind of Quaker governance about, how can you build kind of organisational structures where discussion is different and power is shared differently. We found some really interesting stuff that was about how could you kind of overlay kind of matriarchy into small marketing organisations. And actually when we spoke to a bunch of different academics, actually what they talked about was kind of this real gap in the research around this. And actually that there wasn't a huge amount beyond, a lot of kind of historical references, and I think that there wasn't a lot that was built into organisational workplaces. So when we read then about kind of gift economies and consensus leadership and communal ownership and anti-racism and anti-oppression, decolonisation, it was a real kind of amalgamation of exploration that meant that actually we didn't find the framework, and actually it meant that we actually just heard some really impressive stories, not only within the kind of research we were doing around where is it academically, but also in having conversations. So within the kind of Manchester tech scene, we exist within a kind of network of a lot of minority-led businesses, smaller businesses. So when we were going, what does this need to be? We were like, are we the only ones? Like, is it just us? So we go around and have conversations with people, and what we hear, and this is, another piece of kind of research that we did, was actually that a huge amount of people were talking about how in their organisations, because often they were minority-led and they didn't fit within some of the systems, what they found is actually they felt like there was a similar story of not really feeling like the systems or processes were built for them. So things like they felt like they had been in spaces where they were forced into more capitalist structures, where they were forced into being, navigating systems that were more about a legitimacy and a value structure that didn't really make sense to them, that a lot of people engaged with them in a tokenistic way, and actually that they felt that they were undervalued, even in their kind of small specialism. And it was an interesting one because, like us, they were kind of going, how can we explore some of these things in a way that makes sense? How can we build against the flow of the systems? And actually what was interesting about that is when we decided then we wanted to build the framework, actually we decided we'd make an 18-month strategy, build the business strategy, and we bosh it out nice and quickly, probably in the first kind of 3 to 6 months. You can see where I'm going, right? And actually we thought, we'll build essentially a way of doing this that means that we can knit together all of the different organisations that really believe in this, minority-led businesses, all uniting. Can you hear it, right? It's like the bells. And actually what we do is we do that in a way that we built a framework that allowed us to commercially work with other organisations. And then we do that in a way that kind of empowered our clients, and we built a community of clients who just really loved it. And then we decided that we'd make sure that we weren't really dependent on really high-priced consultancy, and we'd do it all really differently. And I think the really key thing just to say at the end of this, it was a big ambition, is I think that, I don't know, let me ask you, what do you think happened at the end of that?
You burn out.
There you go. On my page it says, I was around March and I was really tired. I was exhausted. I was completely wrecked. And actually I was like, how are we trying to build a matriarchal model that's like centered on care? And the irony of that is that actually I'm almost at burnout through trying to prove it's possible. And I think that if we move to the next slide, actually if we're trying to do this in a way that is about really thinking about how we build a business centered on care, I think actually I realized that we had to be real. And this is a design conference, right? So I was like, if we wanted to do things right, we needed to be able to do the research. Funnily enough, right? You never apply to your own business. Do the research, prototype it in a way that made sense, and then we needed to go again, right? And that was the thing that we didn't quite build in. And I think the game in some of this is actually that applying some of those things that you already know in your work, to your own practice, to your own life, to your own nervous system, is actually so much more challenging. And I think that often we were kind of firefighting, proving the point around the plan, rather than going, how do we actually make sure it feels like coming home after a long trip? And I think that the thing that I thought, I'd just be really honest about was, we were about to build a platform, and then we were like, we haven't got time to build a platform. We still have to pay bills. We need to be able to have capacity to, explore new relationships. And there just wasn't enough of us, like how are we building in care? I'm like, well, we've got to do a delivery, and then we've got to have, all of these things all in one place. We have the systems in place to be able to do it. And this sounds like I'm about to get it's going to be really depressing, right? And it's not actually really depressing, because actually, then I can tell you, I suppose, what actually did happen. So if we move on to the next slide. So I think one of the biggest things that was the big win on this was we had to unlearn some things.
So I was going to give you a moment of reflection, but funnily enough, I've got ADHD and we went over time. So you just have to do this at home later, right? That's what I said to the team. I'm like, that's for later. Yeah, I was going to do it, but we're not going to do it now. We're going to do it later. And I think what we realised was that actually in being able to have and being able to really pragmatically build some of this in, it wasn't just about going, we've got to build in the design in a way that makes sense, but it was also in going, you know, we had to really think about how this worked for us as individuals. I'm just gonna, this is not an advert for Remarkable. This is why not to buy a Remarkable. Highly irritating. Like I could just, let me just go paper though. Paper. Paper would be the answer. Come on. Here we go. Does anyone know how to use Remarkable? I'm not joking.
Remarkably not.
Shocking. Do you? Who does? Do you want to come and help me by Remarkable? Would you mind turning a page for me? Just so I can land. Thank you. I just want to finish. I think I did it.
You did it.
See, look, you asked for help. That's the important bit. And I suppose actually, you know, the big thing that we wanted to say, or that actually came out of this, was in that reflection about the kind of organisational structure and in recognising that it needed to be different. And I think that the key bit about that was actually in realising, and if you take us to the next slide, Lucy, it was actually this idea that, I'm just going to scrap the Remarkable, I'm done, which was this bit here. So it was this idea that when we went, okay, we need to explore redesign, we realised that actually the operationalising of this dream actually is a cycle of redesign. And I think that the key bit about that was in going, we're smaller organisations and we still need stability, but also we want to be able to do that redesign in a way that makes sense for us. It was also in this bit here, which was brutal, this idea that actually I realised that it wasn't a bunch of processes and it wasn't a theory, it was actually this really horrifically personal journey of unlearning a bunch of things. You run an organisation, you go, well, we've got to get money in, there's a certain way in which you do that automatically. And suddenly you have to go, well, am I worried about us bringing in the money, or am I sat in a scarcity mindset and thinking that no one's ever going to be able to help me and nothing's ever going to come because actually, you know, I'm thinking I'm all alone, right? Am I looking to community in a way that makes sense? And actually that was a massive journey, mostly in going, actually doing the individual journey means that you're not thinking just about the processes within an organisation. Suddenly you're thinking about, well, why am I scared? And that's therapy. Do you know what I mean? That's a long journey of what is driving the fear. Let's be really honest. The other bit was about this idea that care isn't soft, right? So to this point over here, it's a fantastic point made around actually the idea that you build care into an organisation actually means you build in care with a huge amount of structure and boundaries. If you're going to do that in a new way, what happens is everyone thinks it's really lovely and everything's going to be really jolly, but actually what you have to do is walk into conversations honestly and go, this is how I feel, and how would you like to have that conversation in a very structured way? It's entirely new skills, right? As well as that, it was this other one here, which is like we exist in an ecosystem. The whole world is not matriarchal because we decided it would be fun today, right? And actually, when that's the case, what you end up with is going, well, we still have to exist and engage with other organisations who do not believe in what we believe in. Are we imposing that on our clients? Probably not a good idea if we're still paying the bills. You know, how do you then reshape your clients? How do you reshape the way in which you engage with people? What's the right amount that you try and influence other people to do the same thing? It was a whole journey. Move on to the next one. And I suppose if I think about like what this then really led to, is actually, it really led to this exploration that actually meant when we actually went, we really want to do 6 months of the matriarchal model. What it meant was a journey of thinking it would be amazing, of thinking it would be great, of thinking it would be really, really fun to go and do that. And then a kind of March moment of going, oh my goodness, what do we need to do? And then now it got to, where are we now, right? So we're 6 months, I've given you 3. The headlines of the next 3 months is, what we then realised is we had to then iterate again and build an iteration. So firstly, it meant we had to recognise that there is something really core about the organisational, operational infrastructure that's required to enable yourself to innovate. I know, everyone's smiling because I'm like, we all know that, right?
And the reality of that is we had to have the right size of team, the right tools in place. We had to have stability in what we were doing at the time to enable us to go, okay, we're going to explore doing that differently. Alongside that way then came was a huge amount of personal introspection, which we had to build into the organisational culture. So horrifically what that meant is you start going, okay, well, what is a one-to-one? What is the purpose of a one-to-one? Do I need the one-to-one to be like that? But is that because we were all told that a one-to-one's got to be like that? Is that because the HR law means the one-to-one has to be like that? Do we now need to do a one-to-one in a different way? So every single policy, every single process entirely rewritten, every single contract with every person entirely rewritten. New team members coming in who then bring in their own kind of ways of doing things. And fundamentally, it got to the point where I think that actually now I feel like we're in a space where we can probably walk in at 6 months and go, there is something fundamentally different about what we're doing. And I think the biggest thing that I'd say, if I was to tell myself, now, if I was to tell my 2024 self, so Kanika at 2024 was like, I'm burnt out, I'm tired, I'm not doing this way anymore, very kind of stubborn, right? And that's that with the privilege of working in tech and recognising that I had the ability with my own organisation to go on this journey. But the key thing that I think I probably have told myself now is probably this one bit, which is definitely around, I suppose if you move to the next slide, it would probably be that actually when doing some of this work, I needed to know it was going to be really hard. It was going to require me to rethink a huge amount of things internally within myself. It was going to need people, infrastructure, and it was going to need really pragmatic, honest conversations. But more than anything else, it was going to be one of those things where I had to go away and have a lot of conversations with people where I go, care is not soft and matriarchy is not soft. And fundamentally doing that kind of work and those rethinking of the systems is actually quite radical because you need it to survive. And actually, I think that what's been really interesting about this year is that when thinking about this being a design conference, I was really thinking actually that design journey has been kind of largely positive, but actually one that's definitely been about, coming in and being honest about where we're at. And I think that if I could kind of give any of you any thoughts on whether any of you should decide to come and do this crazy journey and shape some of these things into the ways of working, it would definitely be in going. I think that I've never been in a workspace now that's more purposeful. It's so much more purposeful. It's so much more deliberate. It's so much more caring. And every day I'm surprised by the things that we can do, the space that we can hold, the conversations that we can have, because now that some of those barriers that are around, well, we should do it this way, don't really exist. And sometimes we test them and we get it wrong. And sometimes we test them and we get it right and we land somewhere better. And if nothing else, I think, obviously we've all agreed everybody's a feminist in the room. There is something about going, that journey of redesign is positive and is definitely something that I'd recommend doing. Thanks so much.